My name is Dr. Sara Place. I'm an Associate Professor of Feedlot Systems at agnext at Colorado State University. My background is in measuring enteric methane emissions, mitigating those emissions, and also assessing enteric methane emissions through modeling techniques. I've developed a tool called BFACT, the Feed Additive Calculator Tool, that can be used to assess your baseline emissions, to look at the impacts of feed additives on mitigating emissions, animal performance, and financial outcomes for cattle feeders.
So to orient us with this tool, the first section is just an optional section to fill out. Store your information if you'd like to print this file. It's nothing that is saved for agnext, so just know that we don't save any user information. The next section is the input section. Each one of the cells that has blue text is something that can be altered by the user. The cells that are highlighted now are the ones that are user defined in terms of you can enter any numeric number in the cell. The ones that are highlighted now are ones that have drop-down menus where you can select based on what the drop-down menu provides. The key input section that we're going to focus in on is the feed additive input section. This section is what's used for the feed additive scenario below to understand how emissions are altered from a baseline scenario to a feed additive scenario. So the first cell is the feed additive impact on methane production in terms of a percent difference. So here we can enter any number we so choose. So for example, if we wanted to look at a feed additive we've heard reduces enteric methane emissions by 30%, we would enter negative 30 here. The next two cells in this section are impacts on animal performance, both average daily gain, ADG, and feed intake as dry matter intake. Here, the user can enter positive or negative values relative to the baseline scenario that's entered on the left-hand side of the input section. We also have additive costs on the next cell down. This is how much the feed additive costs expressed as dollars per head per day. So for example, we can look at a feed additive that potentially costs 5 cents per head per day and look at how that changes our economics below. The final input in the feed additive section is the carbon price expressed as dollars per metric ton of carbon dioxide equivalents that actually is reduced or abated. If you're not sure on where to start with carbon prices, there's some helpful links below where you can look at current carbon prices around the world and in different markets. But here in this scenario, we can look at a $45 carbon price just to see how this affects our outputs below. As we scroll down in the tool, this is now the output section. So all the outputs that are in green are for the baseline scenario, and the outputs that are in orange are for the feed additive scenario. We're going to really focus in on the charts that are on the right-hand side of the output section. So in the upper right-hand corner is first our enteric methane emissions in terms of pounds of carbon dioxide equivalents per head over the feeding period. So in green is the baseline emissions, and in orange is the additive emissions. So we'll note the reduction there, and that's really due to the fact that we entered a 30% reduction in our inputs above. The second chart is the same information, but now expressed instead of pounds as kilograms. So if we want to look at it in metric units, we can also look at those results there. Finally, the last chart is the cash basis margin in dollars per head in terms of the baseline scenario and the additive. So this is based on the economic and performance inputs that were entered above. And in this scenario, we can note that the additive scenario is actually lower than the baseline. That numeric difference is shown over on the left-hand side in this cell that is labeled feed additive scenario minus baseline scenario. And as is highlighted in the red negative number, we've actually lost money in dollars per head for this particular scenario as compared to the baseline. If we have a positive scenario based on our inputs above, we would have this expressed in green in a positive value. So again, that's a quick overview of the agnext Feed Additive Calculator Tool. If you're interested in learning more about each one of these inputs and outputs, there's a user guide that's available at agnext.colostate.edu/beef-fact.